that very soon we will all see the building of the third temple in Jerusalem.
What if a religious ritual involving 5 cows had the power to ignite World War III? In 2023, Hamas publicly stated that the arrival of red heifers in Jerusalem was one of the factors behind escalating conflict with Israel. A terrorist organization was monitoring biblical prophecy, and they understood what most of the world missed. The red heifer isn't just a theological curiosity. It's the triggering mechanism for rebuilding the Third Temple. And the moment that temple construction begins, every geopolitical calculation in the Middle East changes. Peace treaties collapse. Alliances shift. And the countdown to the end times officially starts. The heifers have arrived. The purification ritual is being prepared. The construction materials are in storage, and according to the Temple Institute, they could break ground within months of the sacrifice. This isn't a distant future scenario. This is happening in Jerusalem right now, and the world is holding its breath. September 15th, 2022. That's the date everything changed. 5 red heifers were loaded onto a cargo plane in Texas, flown across the Atlantic, and delivered to a secure location in Israel. The operation was coordinated by an organization called Bone Israel, led by a man named Byron Stinson, a cattle rancher from Texas who had been working with Israeli rabbis for over a decade. These weren't ordinary cows. They were born in 2021 on a ranch specifically breeding for the biblical requirements, monitored from birth, inspected weekly, protected around the clock. Because according to Jewish law, a red heifer must meet standards so strict that only 9 have ever qualified in the entire history of Israel. 9. In over 3,000 years, from the time of Moses to the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD. And now, for the first time since the temple fell, candidates had been identified, transported, and brought to the land. The Temple Institute confirmed their arrival with a public statement. Rabbi Azariah Ariel, son of the founder Rabbi Yisrael Ariel, inspected them personally. He declared that all 5 met the initial visual requirements: completely red, no visible blemishes, never used for labor. But here's what most people don't understand about these heifers. The requirements aren't just strict, they're impossibly precise. Numbers 19, verse 2. Speak to the sons of Israel that they bring you an unblemished red heifer, in which is no defect, and on which a yoke has never been placed. Unblemished, no defect, never yoked. Let me break down what that means in practice. The Hebrew word for red is Adam. It means completely red. Not reddish, not mostly red. Every single hair must be red. The Mishnah, the ancient Jewish legal text, specifies this in Tractate Para, chapter 2, verse 5. If it had 2 black hairs or 2 white hairs growing from one follicle, it is invalid. 2 hairs, out of potentially millions of hairs on the entire animal. That's the standard. 1 white spot the size of a lentil? Invalid. 1 scar from an injury? Invalid. 1 instance of being used to carry a load, even for a moment? Invalid. The heifer must be between 2 and 5 years old. Younger than 2, it's not mature enough. Older than 5, it's too old. And it must be female. A bull doesn't qualify. A calf doesn't qualify. It must be a para, a mature female cow that has never given birth. Now here's why this matters so much. The red heifer isn't for eating, it's not for farming, it's for one single purpose. Purification, Numbers 19, verse 9. Now a man who is clean shall gather up the ashes of the heifer and deposit them outside the camp in a clean place. And the congregation of the sons of Israel shall keep it as water to remove impurity. It is purification from sin. The heifer is burned completely, body, hide, blood, everything, mixed with cedar wood, hyssop, and scarlet thread. The ashes are collected, stored, and mixed with spring water. And that water becomes the only substance in Jewish law that can purify someone who has touched a dead body. And here's the critical connection. Every priest who serves in the temple is considered ritually impure until they've been purified with water mixed with red heifer ashes. Every vessel used in temple service must be purified. Every stone used in construction must be purified. Without the ashes, there is no purification. Without purification, there is no temple service. Without temple service, there is no temple. The red heifer is the key that unlocks everything. And for 1,954 years, that key didn't exist. But in September 2022, 5 potential keys arrived in Israel. The Temple Institute housed them in a secure location. The exact address was never made public. Security was constant. A rabbinical supervision was around the clock. Because here's what happens when a heifer develops a disqualifying mark. It becomes worthless, instantly, not just worthless. It becomes a massive financial loss and a prophetic setback. Each of these heifers was valued at over $500,000, not because of the animal itself, because of what it represents. The restoration of temple worship, the fulfillment of 2,000 years of waiting, the final piece needed to rebuild. And the Temple Institute wasn't taking any chances. By November 2023, all 5 heifers had reached 2 years old, the minimum age for sacrifice. Inspections intensified. Every week, rabbis trained in the laws of the red heifer examined them, looking for white hairs, checking for scars, documenting every detail. And for months, all 5 remained qualified. But then, something happened. In July 2024, Byron Stinson's organization conducted a ceremony in the Sumerian mountains. One of the heifers was burned, publicly, with media present. Stinson claimed it was a legitimate red heifer sacrifice, that the ashes produced were kosher, that the ritual had been performed correctly. But the Temple Institute disagreed. Chaim Richman, the international director, issued a statement. The ceremony was not conducted on the Mount of Olives. It was not facing the Temple Mount. It did not meet the requirements of Jewish law. The ashes, according to the Temple Institute, were not kosher. It was a practice run, not the real thing. And then, in August 2024, the announcement came that stunned the prophetic community. All 5 of the original Texas heifers had been disqualified. One had developed white hairs on its tail, another had a damaged tail from an injury. Others had grown non-red hairs in various locations. The biological clock had run out on the first generation. But here's what most media outlets didn't report. The Temple Institute didn't say the project was over. They said it had gone underground. Richmond stated publicly, "Our efforts are continuing, but we are no longer making public announcements about the status or location of our red heifer candidates." Let me say that again. They're not announcing the status or the location, which means they have new candidates. And they're keeping them hidden. Sources within Jerusalem have confirmed that additional red heifers are being raised on a piece of property on the Mount of Olives, on the exact property where the sacrifice must take place according to Jewish law. Not in Samaria, not in Texas, on the Mount of Olives, facing the Temple Mount. And the rabbis overseeing them have implemented new security protocols. No public updates, no media access, no photographs. The next announcement, according to the Temple Institute, will not be about finding a red heifer. It will be about burning one. But here's the question that should be keeping every geopolitical analyst awake at night. Why did Hamas care? Why would a terrorist organization publicly acknowledge that red heifers were a factor in their decision to escalate violence? Because they understand something most Western observers don't. The red heifer isn't just a religious symbol. It's a countdown timer. The moment a kosher red heifer is sacrificed, a series of irreversible events begins. Within 7 days, the priests can be purified. Within weeks, the vessels can be dedicated. Within months, the altar can be constructed. And the moment the first sacrifice is offered on that altar, every Muslim nation in the Middle East will consider it an act of war. Not because of the animal, because of what the animal enables: the reclaiming of the Temple Mount, the assertion of Jewish sovereignty over the holiest site in Judaism, and the rebuilding of a structure that Islam claims can never be rebuilt. Hamas knows this. Hezbollah knows this. Iran knows this. And they've been watching every development with the red heifers since 2022. In fact, in October 2023, just weeks before the current conflict intensified, a spokesman for Hamas specifically mentioned the red heifers in an interview. He called them a provocation and a threat to Al-Aqsa Mosque. Think about that. A spokesperson for a terrorist organization was monitoring the reproductive cycle and physical characteristics of cattle in Texas because he understood the prophetic implications. And here's what makes this even more urgent. The heifers currently being raised have a limited window. They must be sacrificed before they turn 5 years old. After that, they're too old. They no longer qualify. If these heifers were born in 2022 or 2023, that means the window closes between 2027 and 2028. That's not decades away. That's years, possibly months. And every piece of the infrastructure needed to perform the ritual is already in place. The priests have been trained, and over 500 men from the tribe of Levi have been identified through genealogical research and DNA testing. They've studied the procedures, they've practiced the rituals, they've rehearsed in replica structures. They know exactly what to do. The vessels have been prepared. Clay pots for storing the ashes, made according to ancient specifications, fired in kosher kilns. The spring water source has been identified. Natural springs near the Mount of Olives that meet the requirement for mayim chayim, living water. The cedar wood has been sourced. The hyssop has been cultivated. The scarlet thread has been woven. Every ingredient is ready. The location has been secured. A piece of land on the Mount of Olives with a clear line of sight to the Temple Mount. Purchased, cleared, prepared. Everything is in position, except the heifer. And according to sources inside the Temple Institute, that's the only piece they're not talking about publicly anymore, which suggests they have it, and they're protecting it until the moment is right. But here's what nobody's asking. When is the right moment? Because the sacrifice can't happen in a vacuum. It's not just a religious ceremony performed in isolation. It's a geopolitical trigger. The moment the heifer is burned, the moment the ashes are created, the moment the purification water is mixed, the entire world will know. Media will cover it. Governments will respond. Alliances will shift. And the question becomes, is Israel ready for what comes next? Because what comes next isn't just a ritual. It's the rebuilding of the altar, the resumption of sacrifices, the reclaiming of the Temple Mount. And every one of those steps moves the Middle East closer to the edge of a conflict that prophecy says will eventually engulf the entire world. But before any of that can happen, before the altar is built, before the first stone is laid, the priests must be purified. And that purification requires something that hasn't been created in 2,000 years. The ashes of a red heifer mixed with living water. a substance so rare, so sacred, that only 9 times in all of history has it ever been produced, and the 10th time, according to ancient Jewish teaching, will be prepared in the days of the Messiah. So the question isn't whether the red heifers exist. The question is whether we're living in the days the prophets wrote about. And what I'm about to show you about the ritual itself will prove that we're closer to that moment than anyone realizes. Because the ceremony isn't just ancient tradition, it's chemistry, it's biology, it's a purification process so specific that modern science is only beginning to understand it. And the preparations for that ceremony are happening right now on the Mount of Olives. The red heifer ceremony is called the most mysterious ritual in all of Scripture. Even King Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, couldn't fully understand it. Ecclesiastes Rabbah 7:23 records his words. I said, I will be wise, but it was far from me. He was talking about the red heifer. Because this ritual contains a paradox that has baffled scholars for 3,000 years. The people who prepare the purification water become impure in the process. But the people who use the water become pure. The same substance that defiles the clean purifies the unclean. It makes no logical sense. And yet, it's the only method God gave for removing the highest level of ritual impurity in Jewish law. Corpse contamination. Let me walk you through exactly what this ritual requires, because every detail matters. Numbers 19, verse 2 through 10, lays out the procedure. Speak to the sons of Israel, that they bring you an unblemished red heifer in which is no defect, and on which a yoke has never been placed. You shall give it to Eleazar the priest, and it shall be brought outside the camp and be slaughtered in his presence. Next, Eleazar, the priest shall take some of its blood with his finger and sprinkle some of its blood toward the front of the tent of meeting 7 times. Outside the camp, not inside the holy place, outside, in the presence of the priest, but not slaughtered by the priest, by someone else. The priest takes the blood, dips his finger in it, and sprinkles it 7 times toward the tent of meeting. In modern application, that means toward the Temple Mount, toward where the Holy of Holies once stood. 7 times. The number of completion, the number of perfection. Then verse 5. Then the heifer shall be burned in his sight. Its hide and its flesh and its blood, with its refuse, shall be burned. Everything burns, not just the meat, the hide, the blood, the internal organs, the waste. The entire animal is consumed by fire, but it's not burned alone. Verse 6. The priest shall take cedar wood and hyssop and scarlet material and cast it into the midst of the burning heifer. 3 additional elements, each one specific, each one symbolic. Cedar wood, the tallest, most majestic tree in Israel, representing pride. Hyssop, the lowest, smallest plant, representing humility. Scarlet material, dyed with the blood of a worm, representing sin and sacrifice. All 3 are thrown into the fire with the heifer, and then the ashes are collected. Verse 9. Now a man who is clean shall gather up the ashes of the heifer and deposit them outside the camp in a clean place. And the congregation of the sons of Israel shall keep it as water to remove impurity. It is purification from sin. A clean man gathers the ashes, stores them in a clean place, outside the camp, and those ashes are mixed with water, not just any water, spring water, mayim chayim in Hebrew, living water, running water from a natural source, not rainwater, not well water, our spring water. The mixture becomes mei nida, water of separation, water of purification, and here's how it's used. Numbers 19, verse 17 and 18. Then, for the unclean person, They shall take some of the ashes of the burnt purification from sin, and flowing water shall be added to them in a vessel. A clean person shall take hyssop, and dip it in the water, and sprinkle it on the tent, and on all the furnishings, and on the persons who were there, and on the one who touched the bone, or the one slain, or the one dying naturally, or the grave. The ashes are mixed with spring water in a vessel. A hyssop branch is dipped in the mixture, and the water is sprinkled on anything or anyone that has been contaminated by death, on the 3rd day after contamination, and on the 7th day, 2 applications, 3 days apart. And then verse 19. The clean person shall sprinkle on the unclean on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. And on the 7th day he shall purify him from uncleanness, and he shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and shall be clean by evening. By the evening of the 7th day, the person is clean, ritually pure, able to enter the temple, able to participate in worship. But here's the paradox. Verse 10. The one who gathers the ashes of the heifer shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. The person who collects the ashes becomes unclean. Verse 21. So it shall be a perpetual statute to them. And he who sprinkles the water for impurity shall wash his clothes, and he who touches the water for impurity shall be unclean until evening. Even touching the purification water makes you unclean, and the very substance that purifies others defiles those who handle it. It's a mystery, a paradox, a picture of something deeper, and Jewish scholars have debated its meaning for millennia. But here's what we know for certain. Without this ritual, there is no access to the temple. Without the ashes, there is no purification. Without purification, there is no priesthood. Without the priesthood, there is no temple service. The entire system depends on this one ceremony, and it's only been performed 9 times in all of Jewish history. Let me say that again. 9 times. In over 3,000 years. The first red heifer was prepared by Moses himself in the wilderness. The 2nd through 9th were prepared at various points during the 1st and 2nd temple periods, and the Mishnah records the names of the high priests who oversaw some of them. Shimon HaTzadik prepared 1. Yohanan, the high priest, prepared 2. Eliehonai ben Hakoph prepared 1. Each ceremony was a national event. The entire community participated, priests, Levites, common people, because the ashes from a single red heifer could last for generations, mixed with spring water as needed, used sparingly, carefully guarded. The last red heifer was burned sometime before 70 AD, before the Romans destroyed the temple. And when the temple fell, when the priesthood scattered, when the sacrificial system ended, the ashes were lost. For 1,954 years, there has been no purification water, no way to cleanse from corpse contamination according to the law, no way to restore the priesthood to ritual purity. But here's what the Temple Institute has been preparing for. Because they're not just waiting for a red heifer. They've been training the people who will perform the ceremony. Descendants of Aaron, men from the tribe of Levi, Kohanim, who can trace their lineage back to the original priesthood. Over 500 men have been identified through genealogical research, some through family records preserved for centuries, others through DNA testing, the Cohen modal haplotype, a genetic marker found in a high percentage of Jewish men with the surname Cohen or Levi. Research published in the journal Nature in 1997 identified a Y chromosome signature shared by Jewish priests across different communities. Ashkenazi Kohanim from Europe, Sephardic Kohanim from Spain and North Africa, Yemenite Kohanim, Iraqi Kohanim. All of them carry genetic markers suggesting descent from a common male ancestor approximately 3,000 years ago, right around the time of Aaron. The Temple Institute has used this research to identify candidates. They've cross-referenced DNA with family traditions. They've documented lineages, and they've been training these men. A facility was established in Mitzpeh, Jericho, about 20 minutes east of Jerusalem on the road to Jericho. It's called the Nezer HaKodesh School, the Holy Crown School. There, Kohanim study the laws of the red heifer. They learn the precise procedures. They practice the rituals. They've built replica structures, a model of the altar, a practice version of the ramp where the heifer would be led. They've rehearsed the entire sequence: the inspection of the heifer, the leading to the sacrifice site, to the slaughter, the sprinkling of blood, the burning with cedar, hyssop, and scarlet, the collection of ashes, the mixing with spring water, the sprinkling on the 3rd and 7th days. They know the procedures by memory. But here's what makes this even more remarkable. They've also prepared the physical materials. Clay vessels have been made, fired in kosher kilns, never used for any other purpose. These vessels will hold the ashes. Ancient pottery techniques, modern quality control. The Temple Institute has them in storage. Hyssop has been cultivated. The plant mentioned in the Bible grows wild in Israel, but for the ritual, it must be carefully selected. Branches of the right size, bundled in groups of 3 according to the Mishnah. Cedar wood has been sourced. Not just any cedar, Lebanese cedar, if possible, of the same type used in Solomon's temple, cut to specific lengths, dried properly, ready for the fire. Scarlet thread has been woven, dyed with a substance called tola'at shani, the crimson worm, the same dye mentioned throughout Scripture, the same color used in the tabernacle. Every element is ready. And here's the part that should genuinely alarm you. They've identified the spring water source. On the Mount of Olives, there are natural springs, underground water sources that bubble to the surface. Geologists have surveyed them. Rabbis have tested them. They meet the requirements. Mayim chayim, living water, never standing still, always flowing. The exact location has been kept confidential, but sources confirm it's within meters of the proposed sacrifice site, which means the entire ritual can be performed in one location. And the heifer is burned on the Mount of Olives. The ashes are collected immediately. The spring water is drawn from nearby. The purification water is mixed on site. And then it can be transported to wherever the priests need to be purified. But here's the question nobody's asking. How much purification water can be made from one red heifer? According to calculations by Temple Institute scholars, the ashes from a single red heifer, properly preserved and used sparingly, could purify hundreds of thousands of people. Maybe more. Which means one ceremony, one heifer, one burning, and there's enough purification water to restore the entire priesthood, to purify every vessel in the Temple Institute's collection, to cleanse every stone used in rebuilding the altar. One ceremony changes everything. And here's what makes this urgent right now. In 2024, the Temple Institute announced they had completed a full dress rehearsal, not with a kosher red heifer, with a practice animal that didn't meet the requirements. But they went through the entire procedure, start to finish. They led the heifer to the Mount of Olives. They performed a mock slaughter. They simulated the burning. They practiced the blood sprinkling. They rehearsed the ash collection. And they documented the entire process. Why? Because when the real moment comes, when a kosher red heifer is identified and ready, they cannot afford mistakes. The ceremony must be performed exactly according to the law. One error invalidates everything. A single procedural mistake means the ashes aren't kosher. The purification water doesn't work, and they have to start over with another red heifer that meets the impossible standards. So, they've practiced multiple times. The priests know their roles. The assistants know the sequence. The timing has been calculated. From the moment the heifer is slaughtered to the moment the ashes are sealed in clay vessels, every second has been planned. And here's what the practice runs revealed. The entire ceremony, from start to finish, takes approximately 6 hours. 6 hours to burn a heifer completely to ash. 6 hours to prepare what hasn't been available for 2,000 years. 6 hours to unlock the rebuilding of the temple. But there's something else you need to understand about this ritual. Something that connects to modern science in a way that should shake you. Because the chemistry of red heifer ashes isn't just ancient mysticism. It's biology. It's purification on a molecular level. Research has been conducted on the composition of the ashes. When you burn a heifer completely, hide and flesh and blood and bone, you create a substance that's almost pure calcium. Calcium carbonate, calcium phosphate, trace minerals. When mixed with water, it becomes alkaline, a base solution with a high pH. And here's what scientists have discovered. Alkaline solutions have natural antimicrobial properties. They neutralize bacteria. They break down organic contaminants. They purify. Is that why God chose this method? Is there a scientific basis for the ritual purity laws? Modern researchers are only beginning to explore the question. But what's clear is this. The ritual isn't arbitrary. Every element serves a purpose. The cedar, the hyssop, the scarlet, the spring water, and all of it combines to create something that purifies, both spiritually and physically. And the priests who will perform this ceremony understand both dimensions. They're not just religious men following ancient tradition. They're trained technicians implementing a precise formula. A formula that hasn't been used in 2,000 years. But that's about to change. Because the heifers exist, the priests are ready. The materials are prepared. And according to the Temple Institute, the moment they have a kosher red heifer, they can perform the ceremony within days. Not months, not years, days. And 7 days after that ceremony, the priests can begin temple service. But here's what temple service requires. It's not just the priests. It's the place. You can't perform sacrifices without an altar. And you can't have an altar without a precise location. And you can't build on the Temple Mount without triggering an international crisis. Unless you know exactly where to build, unless you have blueprints, measurements, archaeological data, unless you have prefabricated stones ready to assemble, and technology that allows you to bypass every obstacle that has prevented this for 2,000 years, which is exactly what the Temple Institute has. And what I'm about to show you will prove they're not just preparing for someday. They're ready to build right now. Follow the money. That's what investigators say when they want to understand who's really driving a project. And when you follow the money flowing into the Third Temple preparations, what you find should shock you. And because it's not just coming from Orthodox Jewish communities in Israel. It's coming from Texas, from Switzerland, from South Korea, from Brazil, from evangelical megachurches, from private foundations, from anonymous donors who've never set foot in Israel. The Temple Institute's annual budget has grown from less than $500,000 in the 1990s to over $5 million today. And that's just their public operating budget. The actual amount being spent on temple preparations, including land acquisition, materials procurement, and priestly training, is estimated to be over $100 million in the last decade. Let me show you where it's coming from. Christians United for Israel, founded by Pastor John Hagee in 2006. One of the largest pro-Israel organizations in America. Over 10 million members. An annual budget exceeding $10 million. And a significant portion of their funding goes toward projects in Israel, including support for the Temple Institute. Hagee has stated publicly, multiple times, that he believes the rebuilding of the temple is a necessary step in biblical prophecy. He's preached about it, written books about it, raised millions for it, and he's not alone. The International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, founded by Rabbi Yechiel Eckstein, raises over $100 million annually from evangelical Christians. Much of it goes to humanitarian aid, support for Jewish immigration to Israel, security projects. But sources within the organization confirm that temple-related initiatives also receive funding. Why would Christians fund a Jewish temple? Because millions of evangelical Christians believe the temple must be rebuilt before Jesus can return. It's not a fringe belief. It's mainstream dispensationalist theology, taught in seminaries, preached from pulpits, embedded in best-selling prophecy books. The Left Behind series sold over 80 million copies, and the entire plot hinges on the rebuilding of the temple. So when organizations like the Temple Institute ask for donations, they're not just appealing to Jews, they're appealing to Christians who see this as the fulfillment of Scripture. And the response has been massive. In 2022, the Temple Institute launched a crowdfunding campaign to raise money for the Red Heifer project. They asked for $500,000. They raised over $1.2 million in 6 months, from donors in 47 countries. The United States contributed over 60% of the total. Germany, the UK, Canada, Australia, South Korea, and Brazil made up most of the rest. Individual donations ranged from $10 to $100,000. One anonymous donor in Texas gave $250,000 in a single contribution. That's not religious enthusiasm. That's strategic funding. But it's not just private donors. There are foundations, nonprofit organizations with millions in assets, established specifically to support temple preparations. The Chesed Vemet Foundation, based in New Jersey, assets over $8 million, grants distributed to temple-related projects annually. The Temple Mount Heritage Foundation, registered in Israel, focuses on archaeological research and educational programs related to the temple. The Prophecy Fund, a private foundation in California, supports biblical prophecy fulfillment initiatives. Tax records show distributions exceeding $2 million per year. These aren't small grassroots operations. And these are well-funded, professionally managed organizations with legal teams, financial advisors, and international reach. And they're all focused on one goal: accelerating the rebuilding of the temple. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because the funding isn't just about religious belief, it's about geopolitics. And some of the organizations supporting the temple have connections to political movements that want to reshape the Middle East. The Movement for Greater Israel, a political coalition in Israel that opposes Palestinian statehood and advocates for Israeli sovereignty over all of the West Bank, including the Temple Mount. They've received donations from American evangelical organizations, documented, on the record. The Temple Mount Faithful, led by Gershon Salomon until his death in 2014, are now continued by his successors. This group has attempted multiple times to lay a cornerstone for the third temple on the Temple Mount. They've been blocked by Israeli police every time, but they keep trying. And they're funded by international donors who believe their actions will trigger prophetic events. Think about that. There are people donating money specifically to provoke a crisis on the Temple Mount, because they believe crisis leads to prophecy fulfillment. That's not faith. That's manipulation. And it's happening right now. But here's what most people don't realize. The Israeli government is watching all of this very carefully. Because while they publicly maintain the status quo on the Temple Mount, privately, some officials are sympathetic to the Temple movement. In 2022, the Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir visited the Temple Mount. He's a member of the Religious Zionism Party, a coalition partner in the government, and he's publicly stated that Jews should have the right to pray on the Temple Mount. That's a direct challenge to the current arrangement with the Waqf, and it signals a shift. For decades, Israeli governments avoided the temple issue. Too controversial. Too dangerous. But the current coalition includes members who are openly supportive. And that changes the calculation. Because if the Israeli government ever decides to allow construction on the Temple Mount, they'll have international funding ready to go. They'll have plans approved, materials staged, workers trained. They could move from decision to groundbreaking in weeks. But there's another factor, a one that almost no one is talking about: the Islamic world's response. Because while evangelical Christians are funding the project and Israeli politicians are warming to it, Muslim leaders are sounding alarms. In October 2023, Hamas spokesperson Abu Obaida mentioned the Red Heifers specifically in a televised address. He called them a Zionist provocation designed to defile Al-Aqsa. He warned that any attempt to sacrifice the Heifers or build on the Temple Mount would be met with violence. And he wasn't speaking rhetorically. Within weeks, violence escalated. Now, I'm not saying the Red Heifers caused the conflict. That would be oversimplifying a complex situation. But I am saying that Hamas understands the prophetic significance. They know that the red heifer is the prerequisite for the temple, and they've stated publicly that they will do whatever it takes to stop it. Hezbollah in Lebanon has echoed similar warnings. So has Islamic Jihad. So have clerics in Iran. The Ayatollah Khamenei has declared that any desecration of Al-Aqsa will be met with a regional response, not just from Iran, from the entire Shiite axis, Hezbollah, Shiite militias in Iraq and Syria, Houthi rebels in Yemen. They've drawn a red line, and the red heifer is that line. But here's what should genuinely terrify geopolitical analysts. The funding for the temple is accelerating at the exact same time that Islamic opposition is intensifying. It's not slowing down, it's speeding up. In 2024, the Temple Institute announced a new initiative, a partnership with tech companies to create a virtual temple experience, a digital twin of the future structure. And the project cost over $3 million, funded entirely by donations in less than a year. They've built a photorealistic 3D model, fully interactive, available on multiple platforms. You can explore the temple on your phone, on your computer, in virtual reality. And here's the purpose. They're preparing people, preparing Jews around the world to understand what temple worship looks like, preparing Christians to see prophecy fulfilled before their eyes, preparing governments to accept the inevitable. Because once millions of people have walked through the digital temple, once they've seen the sacrifices in VR, once they've experienced the rituals virtually, the psychological barrier to accepting the real thing collapses. It's not shocking anymore. It's familiar. And that's intentional. The Temple Institute has hired marketing consultants, brand strategists, social media specialists. They're treating the temple like a product launch, and they're targeting a global audience. In 2025, they released a documentary, The Third Temple, Blueprint for Eternity. It's been viewed over 5 million times on YouTube, translated into 22 languages. It features interviews with rabbis, architects, archaeologists, and priests. It walks viewers through every aspect of the temple: the design, the vessels, the sacrifices, and it ends with a call to action. Support the rebuilding. Donate. Get involved. Be part of prophecy. Over 100,000 people have donated as a direct result of that video. The average donation is $75. That's $7.5 million from a single piece of content. And this isn't a religious movement operating on faith and prayers. This is a professionally managed, internationally funded, strategically marketed campaign with a clear goal, a clear timeline, and clear metrics for success. But there's another dimension to this that goes beyond religion and politics: technology. Because the Third Temple isn't being designed as a first-century structure. It's being designed as a 21st century smart building. Let me show you what I mean. The Temple Institute has partnered with Israeli tech firms to integrate cutting-edge technology into the temple design. Cameras, not just for security, for broadcasting. Every sacrifice will be live-streamed in 4K from multiple angles. Think about that. When the priests offer the morning Tamid sacrifice, millions of people around the world will watch in real time, on their phones, on their laptops, on screens in their churches. The temple becomes the most watched religious site on earth. Why does that matter? Because Revelation 11 describes two witnesses who prophesy in Jerusalem for 1,260 days. Verse 9 and 10. Those from the peoples and tribes and tongues and nations will look at their dead bodies for 3.5 days, and will not permit their dead bodies to be laid in a tomb. And those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them and celebrate. And they will send gifts to one another, because these two prophets tormented those who dwell on the earth. People from every nation will look at their bodies. How? 2,000 years ago, that was impossible. There was no technology for global real-time viewing. But today, live streaming, satellite feeds, social media. The entire world can watch events in Jerusalem simultaneously. And the Temple Institute is building that infrastructure right into the temple. But there's more. AI translation, real-time, integrated into the broadcasts. A priest speaks Hebrew during a sacrifice. The AI translates it instantly into 100+ languages. Viewers in Japan hear it in Japanese. Viewers in Brazil hear it in Portuguese. Viewers in Nigeria hear it in English. The language barrier is gone. Isaiah 56, verse 7. My house will be called a house of prayer for all the peoples. For the first time in history, that's technologically possible. And the Temple Institute is making it happen. They've also designed a pilgrimage management system, an app integrated with Israeli border control, and coordinated with airlines and hotels. Jews and Christians wanting to visit the temple can register, schedule their visit, reserve viewing times. The system manages crowd flow, prevents overcrowding, ensures security, and it tracks everything. Who visits? When? From which country? How often? Data collection on a scale never before possible for a religious site. Why? The official reason is security and efficiency. The unstated reason is control. Because whoever controls access to the temple controls one of the most powerful symbols in the world. And right now, the Temple Institute is positioning itself as that gatekeeper. But here's the question nobody's asking. What happens when the temple is built and the world realizes it's not just a Jewish project? What happens when Christians start demanding access for worship? What happens when Muslims react with rage? What happens when governments try to regulate it? Because the temple won't belong to Israel alone. It will be a global phenomenon, a focal point for 3 major religions, a symbol of prophecy, a geopolitical flashpoint, and the technology built into it will make it the most scrutinized building in human history. Every sacrifice broadcast, every prayer recorded, every visitor tracked. And here's where it connects to something darker. Revelation 13, verse 14 and 15. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth, because of the signs which it was given him to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who had the wound of the sword and has come to life. And it was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, cedar, so that the image of the beast would even speak, and cause as many as do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. An image that speaks, that appears alive. Some scholars believe this will be an AI-powered hologram, a digital creation that mimics life. And where will it be set up? In the temple, in the holy place, the abomination of desolation, the infrastructure being built right now, the cameras, the AI systems, the global broadcasting capabilities could all be used for that purpose. The technology meant to spread worship of the true God could be hijacked to promote worship of the Antichrist. It's the ultimate deception, and it's being prepared right now, not by villains in dark rooms plotting evil, by sincere people who believe they're serving God, by donors who think they're funding prophecy, not by engineers who are just building what they're told to build. But the end result is the same. A temple, with global reach, with technological power, with the ability to broadcast to every nation, and a timeline that's accelerating faster than anyone expected. Because the funding is there, the support is there, the technology is there. The only thing missing is the political agreement, the covenant that allows construction to begin. And that covenant is closer than most people realize. Because while the world has been focused on conflicts and crises, diplomats have been quietly negotiating. The Abraham Accords were just the beginning. Talks with Saudi Arabia continue behind the scenes. Discussions about Jerusalem's status, about access, about sovereignty, and about something most people haven't connected to the temple: economic development. What if the covenant isn't just about peace? What if it includes massive investment, infrastructure projects, economic partnerships? What if the rebuilding of the temple is packaged as part of a regional development plan? That changes the entire dynamic. Suddenly, it's not just about religion. It's about jobs, about tourism, about money, and governments care about money. So what if a leader emerges, a skilled negotiator, someone with influence in both the West and the Middle East, who proposes a comprehensive agreement? Peace for Israel, security guarantees for Arab states, economic development for everyone. And as part of that agreement, Israel gets permission to build on the Temple Mount, with international protections for Islamic sites, with shared governance, with global oversight. It's a solution that seems impossible today, but that becomes possible with the right crisis, the right pressure, the right timing. And when that agreement is signed, when the covenant is confirmed, the countdown begins. Not in years, not in decades. The countdown is measured in months, because everything is ready. The red heifer, the priests, the vessels, the blueprints, the materials, the technology, the funding, all of it positioned, all of it prepared, all of it waiting for one signature, one agreement, one moment when the impossible becomes inevitable. And that moment is coming. Not someday. Soon. Let me walk you through exactly what happens the moment the red heifer is sacrificed. Because this isn't speculation. This is a documented sequence based on biblical law, Temple Institute protocols, and construction timelines. And it moves faster than most people realize. Day 1. The red heifer ceremony. The heifer is led to the Mount of Olives. The priest performs the slaughter. The blood is sprinkled 7 times toward the Temple Mount. The heifer is burned completely. Cedar wood, hyssop, and scarlet thread are thrown into the fire. 6 hours later, the ashes are collected, sealed in clay vessels, mixed with spring water from a nearby source. The purification water is created. Day 1 is complete. Now here's where the timeline accelerates. Numbers 19 requires purification on the 3rd day and the 7th day. So the priests who will perform temple service undergo the first sprinkling on day 3. They're sprinkled with the purification water. They wash their clothes. They wait. Day 7. The second sprinkling. By evening of day 7, Sekutes, the priests are ritually pure for the first time in 1,954 years. They can handle the sacred vessels. They can approach the altar. They can perform sacrifices. 7 days from the red heifer ceremony to a functioning priesthood. 1 week. But they can't perform sacrifices without an altar. So here's what happens simultaneously during that 7-day period. The construction crews mobilize. The prefabricated stones, stored in warehouses outside Jerusalem, are transported to the Temple Mount. The location has already been surveyed. The coordinates are precise, based on Leon Rittmeyer's research, based on ground-penetrating radar data. The northern section of the Temple Mount, away from the Dome of the Rock, in the open plaza area. Heavy equipment moves in, not to dig, not to excavate, to assemble, because the stones are already cut, already shaped, already numbered. They're laid out in sequence, like assembling a 3-dimensional puzzle. The first level of the altar, 12 cubits square, approximately 21 feet. Massive limestone blocks, each one weighing several tons, lifted by cranes, positioned by engineers, but never touched by metal during assembly. Wooden wedges, rope, ancient techniques with modern equipment. The second level, 10 cubits square, set on top of the first. The third level, 8 cubits square. The fourth level, the Mizbeach itself, where the fire burns, where the sacrifices are offered. 8 cubits square, about 14 feet on each side. Total height, 10 cubits, approximately 17.5 feet. The ramp is constructed on the south side, rising gradually to the top, wide enough for priests to walk up, carrying sacrificial animals. According to the Temple Institute's construction timeline, working around the clock with trained crews, the altar can be fully assembled in 45 to 60 days. Less than 2 months. But here's what they're not waiting for. They're not waiting for the full temple building to be completed before they start sacrifices, because biblical precedent allows for sacrifices to begin as soon as the altar is dedicated. Ezra 3 verse 2 and 3. Then Jeshua, the son of Jozadak, and his brothers, the priests, and Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and his brothers, arose and built the altar of the God of Israel to offer burnt offerings on it, as it is written in the law of Moses, the man of God. So they set up the altar on its foundation, for they were terrified because of the peoples of the lands. And they offered burnt offerings on it to the Lord, burnt offerings morning and evening. The altar was set up first. Sacrifices began immediately. The temple building came later. The same pattern can happen now. Altar dedicated by day 60. Sacrifices begin by day 61. The morning tamid, a male lamb, 1 year old, without blemish, slaughtered at dawn, offered with a grain offering and a wine libation. The evening tamid, another lamb, slaughtered at twilight. 2 sacrifices a day, every day, exactly as it was done for over 1,000 years before the temple was destroyed. And the entire world will watch, because the cameras will already be installed. the streaming infrastructure will be live. The moment the first lamb is placed on the altar, the moment the fire consumes it, the moment the smoke rises toward heaven, billions of people will see it. On their phones, on their computers, on news channels broadcasting live from Jerusalem. It will be the most watched religious event in human history, and it will mark the beginning of something the Bible has been warning about for 2,600 years. The final 7 years. Because once the sacrifices begin, once the altar is operational, the conditions are set for the covenant. And Daniel 9:27 says, the covenant doesn't start the sacrifices. The covenant confirms them, protects them, guarantees them. And he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. The sacrifices are already happening when the covenant is signed, which means the timeline isn't covenant, then temple. It's temple, then covenant. The altar is built. The sacrifices begin. And then a world leader steps forward and says, I will guarantee Israel's right to continue this for 7 years. That's the covenant. And the moment it's signed, the countdown becomes official. 2,520 days, 7 prophetic years, divided exactly in half at 1,260 days. For the first 1,260 days, the sacrifices continue. The priests serve. The offerings are made. And during that time, the full temple structure is completed. The Temple Institute estimates 2 to 3 years for complete construction. That fits perfectly within the first half of the tribulation. Ezekiel's temple rises on the Temple Mount. The chambers are finished. The holy place is constructed. The veil is hung. The most magnificent structure in the world. And then, at day 1,260, exactly 3.5 years into the covenant, everything changes. Daniel 9:27. In the middle of the week, he will put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. The Antichrist breaks the covenant. He stops the sacrifices. He enters the temple. And 2 Thessalonians 2:4 tells us what he does next. He takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. He sits in the holy place. He claims divinity. He demands worship. And Revelation 13 says he sets up an image that speaks, that appears alive, the abomination of desolation. And from that moment, the second half of the tribulation begins. The worst 1,260 days in human history, the time of Jacob's trouble, the great tribulation. But we're not there yet. Right now, we're in the setup phase, the phase where the red heifer is identified, the phase where the altar is designed, the phase where the funding is raised, the phase where the world is being prepared psychologically for something it hasn't seen in 2,000 years. And that preparation is happening faster than anyone expected. In 2022, the red heifers arrived. In 2023, they reached the minimum age for sacrifice. In 2024, the original 5 were disqualified, but new candidates were secured. In 2025, the Temple Institute announced their preparations had gone underground. And now, in 2026, we're watching the final pieces fall into place. Geopolitical negotiations continue. Abraham Accords expansion is discussed. Saudi normalization with Israel is on the table. Technology advances. AI systems improve. Global streaming infrastructure expands. Funding accelerates. Donations pour in from around the world. Foundations establish long-term support. And the priesthood trains. And over 500 Levites ready to serve. Practicing rituals. Memorizing procedures. Everything is converging. And here's what you need to understand about this moment. The temple isn't just a building. It's a prophetic marker. It's the clearest sign that we've entered the final countdown. Because once the altar is operational, once the sacrifices begin, once the covenant is confirmed, there's no turning back. The sequence is irreversible. The timeline is fixed. The end is certain. Daniel saw it 2,600 years ago. Jesus confirmed it 2,000 years ago. And we're watching it unfold in real time. But here's the question every person watching this needs to answer. What does this mean for you? Not for Israel. Not for the Middle East. For you personally. Because if the temple is rebuilt within the next few years, if the sacrifices resume, if the 7-year covenant is signed, then we're living in the generation that will see the return of Christ. Not our children, not our grandchildren, us. And that means the choices you make right now have eternal consequences. Revelation 13 describes 2 marks, the mark of God on the foreheads of his servants, and the mark of the beast on the right hand or forehead of those who worship him. During the tribulation, every person will have one or the other. There's no neutral ground, no middle option, no way to avoid the choice. And once you take the mark of the beast, Revelation 14:9-11 says, there's no redemption. If anyone worships the beast and his image, and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he also will drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is mixed in full strength in the cup of his anger. And he will be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever. They have no rest day and night, those who worship the beast and his image, and whoever receives the mark of his name. Forever. No rest, no second chance. That's the stakes. So if the temple is about to be rebuilt, if the final 7 years are about to begin, where do you stand? Have you accepted Jesus Christ as your Savior? Have you trusted in his blood shed on the cross for your sins? Because the same Bible that predicted the temple would be destroyed in 70 AD, and it was, is the same Bible that predicts it will be rebuilt before the end. And if the first prophecy came true with perfect accuracy, the second one will too. The temple will rise. So the covenant will be signed. The tribulation will begin. And Jesus will return. Not as a baby in a manger. Not as a suffering servant. As King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And every person alive will face him. The question is, will you face him as Savior or as Judge? Because the window is closing. The timeline is accelerating. The pieces are in position. The red heifer is being prepared. The priests are ready. The stones are cut. The funding is secured. And the moment the ceremony happens, the moment the ashes are created, the moment the altar is dedicated, the countdown begins. 7 years from covenant to return. 2,520 days from signature to second coming. And we're watching the setup happen in real time. So don't wait. Don't assume you have decades. Don't think this is something for future generations. The temple is coming. And it's coming soon. And when it does, everything changes. But there's one element of this timeline that almost no one is discussing. And it's hidden in the Jewish calendar. Because the red heifer sacrifice can't happen on just any day. It has to align with specific dates, specific festivals, specific prophetic timing. And when you map out the biblical festivals against the construction timeline, against the geopolitical developments, against the birth years of the current heifer candidates, a pattern emerges. A pattern that points to a specific window, a specific season, not years away, months. And what happens during that window could trigger the sequence that begins the final 7 years. The question isn't if the temple will be rebuilt. The question is, are you ready for what happens when it is?